Good afternoon. I'm Sarah Mastillo, the I.A. O'Shaughnessy Dean of the College of Arts and Letters. Thank you all for being here today, and for all of us who are joining us via live stream, for what should be a fascinating conversation about a topic that is so important to Notre Dame and to our nation. As a university community, we are committed to advancing scholarship and dialogue that preserves and strengthens democratic ideals, supporting governmental and societal institutions that encourage inclusive, broad, and open participation, and promoting civil discourse. We are honored to be joined this afternoon by two senators and leaders who are widely admired for fostering friendships and collaborations that transcend party lines, and who remain focused on the Senate's important work of legislating. We are proud that both senators also share strong ties and friendships with the Notre Dame family. Please join me in welcoming Reverend John I. Jenkins, C.S.C., Senator Chris Coons, and Senator Todd Young. United States Senator Chris Coons, Democrat from Delaware, and notably parent of a Notre Dame graduate, is a thoughtful and pragmatic leader, guided by a desire to build bridges even where there are deep divides, who demonstrates a tireless commitment to respectful discourse. He has been recognized by the Bipartisan Policy Center with its Legislative Action Award for his commitment to bipartisanship, and the independent congressional tracking website, GovTrack, ranked him as one of the top 3 most productive senators of both parties. Throughout his time in Washington, Senator Coons has worked hard to find bipartisan solutions to the important issues facing Delaware and the nation. Representing Notre Dame's home state of Indiana, United States Senator Todd Young, a Republican, shares a similar record of pragmatism and bipartisanship. Like Senator Coons, Senator Young has also been awarded the Legislative Action Award by the Bipartisan Policy Center for his commitment to reaching across the aisle. Of the 50 bills Senator Young has introduced this year, almost all have Democratic co-sponsors, a remarkable data point in such a partisan environment. Last year, Senator Young helped author one of Congress's highest profile bipartisan bills, joining Majority Leader Chuck Schumer and others on crafting the historic $280 billion CHIPS and Science Act to boost research, manufacturing, and innovation in the United States. And he continues to successfully advocate for bipartisan policies and funding to meet our nation's greatest challenges. Joining these distinguished senators is Reverend John I. Jenkins, C.S.C., the 17th president of the University of Notre Dame. Now in his 19th and final year as president, Father Jenkins has devoted himself to fostering the university's unique place in academia, the church, our nation, and the world. Father Jenkins has been committed to combining teaching and research excellence with a cultivation of the deeper purposes of Catholic higher education. While pursuing academic distinction, he has brought renewed emphasis to Notre Dame's distinctive mission, rooted in the tradition of the Congregation of Holy Cross, the university's founding community, to educate the whole person, mind, body, and spirit. Within our university and beyond, Father Jenkins has called for civil discourse, grounded in the Christian view of others as equally made in the image of God, as a way to find common ground. And today's conversation grows out of these commitments. Father Jenkins, Senator Coons, and Senator Young, I think I speak for everyone in the room by saying we are all looking forward to a vibrant conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Sarah, and welcome, Senator Coons, Senator Young. As Sarah shared, this conversation is part of our broader ND Forum on the future of democracy. Our aim through these conversations is to foster respectful dialogue and reflection on the rising threats to democracy here at home and abroad, and how democracy can be reinvigorated for the U.S. and the world. And we're honored to have two really distinguished senators and friends of Notre Dame with us from opposite sides of the aisle who have devoted their careers to civility, bipartisanship, and effective policymaking. I've had the opportunity to work with each of these gentlemen, and the two of them, for my money, are among the very best in government leadership today. So thank you both for making out of busy schedules. Senator Coons just came from the Middle East. I think Senator Young is going there soon. Thanks for coming to Notre Dame and being part of this conversation. All eyes have been on Washington this past week or two. I think you will agree with me that this stretch has not been among Congress's best moments. Moreover, the divisions and dysfunction of our nation poses daunting challenges at home and abroad. Recognizing that the House has very different dynamics than the Senate, can you tell us about the current environment in the House? Are things as bad as they seem? Can you give us reasons for hope? I'll start with you, Chris.
Well, thank you, Father John, and let me, this is the first time we've seen each other since the announcement of your impending retirement. Let me just thank you for being a remarkable leader. You've helped shape and lead this community through some very difficult times, and you're leaving it on a tremendous upward trajectory. Please join me in a round of applause. For Father John. I love coming back here because my wife and I have found here a community that speaks to our values and our ambitions, our hope. I would rather not spend all this time talking about Congress, but that's why you've got me here. I do have to say at the outset, our son Jack, of our 3 kids who went off to college about the same time, had just an incredible experience here. He was a resident of the Center of the Universe Alumni Hall. So go Dogs, if there's any alumni residents here. And it really helped shape him for his current career teaching at a Catholic high school in Delaware. Is it as bad as it seems? Yeah, it's pretty darn bad. The dysfunction and the disconnect in the House is gravely concerning. In the Senate, I am much more optimistic about where we are. You are very well represented by a strong and capable legislator. I'm a more liberal Democrat. He's a more conservative Republican. But Todd has already shown, and you heard this in the introduction, his legislative chops, his willingness to reach way across the aisle to Chuck Schumer, the majority leader, and stick with it, and legislate on something strategically important, even when there were lots of voices that easily could have pulled that apart. I just returned from a visit to Israel, Saudi Arabia, and Egypt with a bipartisan group of 10 senators that ranged from Cory Booker and Dick Blumenthal to Lindsey Graham and John Thune. And it was reassuring to me for us to be in 3 capitals in the middle of a very difficult moment, speaking with one voice about America's principles and our place in the world, reinforcing messages delivered by our president and our ambassadors. And I'm optimistic that we are now going to take up and pass robust funding for Israel, for Ukraine, and for humanitarian relief. But this is going to be difficult, and we need voices throughout our country that will reward, recognize, and reinforce senators like Senator Young, who are willing to be bipartisan when the moment demands it.
Thanks. Senator Young.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much for having Chris and myself to this forum. Thank you for the University of Notre Dame. You are just a breath of fresh air as we look around the country and we think about the quality of public discourse or lack thereof sometimes, whether it's on our university campuses, through the media, or sometimes, unfortunately, in the halls of Congress. And you continue to understand that there is a way to have principled and oftentimes even heated disagreements on the issues of the day, but to treat one another with respect and love, and understand that this whole project we call democracy doesn't work if you don't approach public life and the life of ideas in that fashion. So thank you for your long-standing leadership to this institution and more broadly to that sort of civility, Father John. I'm grateful for that and for our friendship. I'm also grateful for this genuine friendship. Dare I say, the best thing about running for office has been developing all manner of friendships that I would not have developed had I not taken this plunge many years ago. Friends with rank and file Hoosiers, friends across the world in governmental, business, and civic capacities, but very deep friendships within the halls of Congress. And this friendship is built, as I think most deep friendships are, on trust. Chris and I have disagreements. We don't fixate on them. We try and work through them. Where we can't work through them, we learn to coexist and still harbor them. But we're always searching for areas of agreement, and that only occurs through candid conversation. As we think about the House, I'm not avoiding the question, I'll come back to it. As we think about the House, I'm empathetic to many of my colleagues on both sides of the aisle. Empathetic about the challenges of being a public servant in this day and age. It seems to me, and I'll take a slightly different tack, positive behavior, the sort of behavior that I think most of us would want from all of our legislators, is not always rewarded. It's not rewarded through the media, and by extension, it's not always rewarded by the electorate or our constituencies. So it takes self-discipline. It takes a certain amount of sacrificing opportunity to become more popular on particular occasions or to gain the upper hand on others, sacrificing all manner of near-term interest in order to serve the broader public good. So it's a tough time to serve, but that doesn't mean that we're not all accountable in the end for our behavior. This is supposed to be hard, working through technological and media changes in our economy, geopolitical changes. It's one of the reasons these jobs are incredibly interesting and often coveted. We have a responsibility not to use these positions to become celebrities, to become influencers, but to work through the institutions to serve you. And this is happening. Back to the positive behavior not always being rewarded. You could be forgiven, because it's rarely reported on the media, that just in recent months, across party aisles, as we approach a presidential election year, in the midst of a closely divided country and closely divided Congress, we just collaborated on an effort to raise the debt ceiling and try and get some of our spending under control. We just collaborated on various provisions related to artificial intelligence regulation. It's a work in process, but that too is not easy to do. We have collaborated on countless important and constructive legislative initiatives, and if time permits, we can revisit the last couple of years where we got infrastructure in chips and science, in postal reform, in the Bipartisan Safe Communities Act, on and on, all done through bipartisan collaboration. There are ways to make Congress work, to make your government work, and to represent all of you in a way that is consistent with your values and your interests. We just need to resolve to do it.
I think you're right, and both of you, I want to emphasize this, as was said earlier, kind of have a record of bipartisanship and have a record of constructive legislative accomplishments. I'm going to focus on your chamber a little bit, the Senate. You're able to elect leaders, which is a good thing, but there are members of Congress who have no institutional memory of regular order of Congress and the business of legislating. And even in the Senate side, things can be difficult to get things through. Talk about the Senate and talk about how you get things done, what the current challenges are, the structural challenges and the kind of environmental challenges to accomplishing things.
Well, one of our core structural or environmental challenges has been the disaggregation of power in a lot of ways. Mm-hmm. How you fundraise is now more driven by how popular you are on Twitter, or X, I suppose, than speaking to your home state. We now fundraise all over the country in real time in very small dollar amounts. Notoriety often produces more political power than rolling up your sleeves and doing the hard work of compromising and legislating. I'm an appropriator. I'm a member of the committee that spends all of your money every year. And we are fighting relentlessly with our leadership to give us the time to actually hammer out the bills. It takes a lot of time. This may seem counterintuitive, but why wouldn't you want to have the full Appropriations Committee work through committee by committee, area by area, all the different areas? Well, because then the whole $1.7 trillion gets done in one big bill at the last minute, where the only people who really know what's in it are leadership and their staffs. So a very small number of people become more and more powerful, more able to slip things in and take things out and move them without the rest of the 100 knowing really what's going on. That has happened in both chambers, the House and Senate, the concentration of power in leadership, the weakening of committees. The only counter to that is having relationships of trust across the aisle with folks who you're able to look to and say, you know, actually, this is not in our interest. We want to legislate. We don't want all the legislating to be done by a very small number of senators in a quick rush. And we have dozens of issues that need our attention. How do we fix social media? How do we regulate artificial intelligence, something Todd's a real leader on? How do we deal with agriculture? How do we address climate change? Or how do we improve education? Or how do we address criminal justice? I mean, there's hundreds of things for us to legislate on. Regular order may be a fond, faint memory for most of the more junior senators, but I had the opportunity to intern for a Republican senator and a Democratic senator in the 80s, and to watch what it looked like and to think, oh my gosh, if somehow I could ever be so lucky as to be one of those, that's what I want to do. The difference between how they acted and legislated and where we are today is significant. And part of the answer is to invest time in getting to know each other. Traveling together overseas, working out in the gym together. He works out more than I do. Spending time actually getting to know each other's families. There's also a weekly bipartisan prayer breakfast that I'm very active with. Last Wednesday, Senator Ted Cruz was the speaker. And one of the great examples of why this is a good experience, because Ted stood up and spoke about, and we don't share the details of what anyone says, but every Wednesday morning, one senator stands up for half an hour and talks about their faith, their life, their values, their journey. And he talked about the impact on his children of his service with an honesty and a vulnerability and a frankness that all of us can connect with and all of us could understand. And for years, every time I've thought to myself, oh, the prayer breakfast is first thing in the morning. I'm too tired. I don't feel like making it. Because for years I was commuting from Delaware. I'd have to get up at 5 to make it to the Capitol in time. Anytime I looked at the name, Barrasso, Mike Lee, I would make myself go and inevitably learn something about the humanity of another senator. Todd's someone I respect because of his legislative prowess, and I like him as a person. Ted Cruz, I will confess, is not someone who I naturally was warm to. Just no disrespect, but some of his legislative tactics have been a little annoying. It was in fact, I believe, once said by Mitch McConnell that if he were shot dead on the floor of the Senate, there'd be 99 suspects and no witnesses. Sorry. But the point here is even someone who is such an obstructionist, if you take the time to listen, you can come out the other side of that hour together going, I understand him now more, and I am now more willing to extend my hand. Hopefully a hand extended will come back. But one of the challenges is the same challenges we have in our extended families when you get together at Thanksgiving or Christmas. Can you get through the event without having a fight over politics? Since our job is politics, it's a little more challenging, but we have to do exactly the same thing.
I agree with everything except anything that would be publicly objectionable that Chris just said.
Ted's lovely.
So a couple of thoughts on this topic. Regular order. Chris was absolutely right about appropriations. The Appropriations Committee ought to be the most powerful committee by far in the United States Senate. Sadly, it isn't always, because we don't always follow regular order. That is the process that is laid out in our rules and in the law. First, to actually draft a budget, and that happens in the Budget Committee, and then to appropriate, that is, spend your money consistent with that budget, working in open, collaborative, bipartisan, and dynamic fashion. When given the ability to legislate in that fashion, people like Chris Coons are able to get major wins for our country, not just for the state of Delaware, wins like America's answer to the Belt and Road Initiative, the Development Finance Corporation. He was the author, he was the creator of that essential entity to our geopolitics. These sorts of things often get lost or go unfunded when you have one or two leaders behind closed doors with some staff members cooking up a massive spending bill as we approach year's end. So that needs to change. It is changing incrementally. How do we expedite that? I credit Senator Schumer. I credit Senator Schumer for, in the gym, yes?
Literally.
We're not going to get real detailed or graphic. But Senator Schumer and I work out in the same gym. We've struck up a working sort of relationship and even a friendship. We don't talk a lot of business in the gym, but he oftentimes will take his flip phone out of his pocket, which is a bit ironic since he's trying to regulate artificial intelligence, but yeah, nonetheless. So, but Schumer and I share a concern about China, their military, the extent to which they often are undermining our values and they're a threat to our way of life, and we want to do something about it. And the first thing I said to Chuck is, Chuck, I think you and I see eye to eye on this, but if we're going to collaborate on this, we're going to go through regular order. And every step of the way, I basically, did a gut check with Chuck and said, listen, are we still doing regular order here? Because it's now out in the media. This is now a public, this is publicly known. We're working on this. I'm going to tap out. I'm going to stop working with you if you're undermining my promise to my colleagues and my own credibility that this is going to be a bipartisan effort. He never did. He never wavered. And what he discovered, or we learned, is that when you use the rules of Congress, the individual committees, you have open hearings and open debate. You allow members of Congress to consider bills and to amend bills, and then to have a fair process whereby you vote at the end, and you live with the consequences. You bring the bill to the floor, you have more amendments, you have more votes, and then you have a final vote at the end. And you live with a work product, which may not be 100% what you wanted, but it reflects the will of the American people through their elected representatives. That process not only worked, but it significantly increased trust, at least for a short time period, in the institution. So Chuck is attempting to replicate that, it seems, in some other areas with artificial intelligence. I think we may have one line of effort that helps us revisit our spending practices too. So in the end, you've got to use the institution rather than and work through the institution consistent with the institution's rules rather than trying to hijack the institution for your own parochial or political needs. That is what is most needed. It takes a lot of self-restraint to do that.
I'm so glad for both those answers, because I think there's such a tendency toward cynicism and discouragement in what we read in the press, but you both given us examples of positive legislative efforts, and we know it's difficult. It's designed to be difficult.
Yeah.
It's designed to be difficult to pass laws, but you guys have worked hard. So I want to talk about the kind of opportunities for bipartisanship and passing some of your key priorities, and I'm going to ask each of you in turn what those are. And Chris, I'll start with you, Senator Coons. You're chair of the Senate Appropriations Subcommittee on the State Department and Foreign Operations. I know that a lot of your time is spent on the international scene. You're a key diplomatic voice and representative in that area. So talk about the complex, challenging world we face in Ukraine, in the Middle East. We know you've just gotten back from the Middle East. Talk about that situation. Talk about our nation's foreign policy, where we are with the Senate, and what's possible for bipartisan coming together to get things across the finish line in this area.
I'm taking notes.
Just a few. Look, we're at one of those hinge points in history where there are dramatic changes unfolding strategically in several theaters around the world at the same time. My view of our role in the world is informed both by my faith and by my confidence that we are the greatest force for good in human history, but that this is a difficult and dangerous world, and that there are billions of people whose human needs are unmet, who live or suffer under political systems dramatically different from our own, and whose cultures and traditions are leading to conflicts that are tectonic globally. Russia's brutal invasion of Ukraine was enough. That was a big enough challenge for us. And we have mobilized NATO and 50 countries around the world to deliver billions of dollars of aid. The Ukrainians have fought more bravely and more successfully than any of us anticipated, and they've really been a model for what it means for a formerly autocratic, formerly Soviet society to turn around and stand up for themselves, not just through the Maidan and the fight that they came through a decade ago, but now on the front lines every day. As if that were not challenging enough to sustain, we now have in Israel and Gaza a war that is on the very verge of becoming a regional conflagration. Part of why our delegation of 10 went to Riyadh to meet with Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman and to Cairo to meet with President El-Sisi, as well as to Tel Aviv to meet with the families of American hostages, children currently being held by Hamas in tunnels under Gaza, but also to meet with senior Israeli leadership, was in both cases, I think, to accomplish the same thing, to deter other countries, Iran and Russia, from being more aggressive, from engaging in more aggression, to send a strong and clear message to China of our determination and our will and our ability to sustain it across several years, even though expensive, even though challenging, and to demonstrate that we are a reliable ally. Senator Jim Risch, the conservative Republican ranking member of the Foreign Relations Committee, carries around with him a copy of a document signed by the United States in 1994. It's the Budapest Memorandum. In 1994, Ukraine had the third largest nuclear arsenal on Earth, and they voluntarily gave it up. And the United States, the United Kingdom, and Russia signed an agreement that we would defend their territorial integrity. Guess what? That is now being tested. Is our word worth anything? So President Biden often says that our greatest strength, in addition to the United States, is our global network of allies that stretches from Japan and Korea and Australia to NATO, the United Kingdom, all over the world. China doesn't have anything like that. They have nervous neighbors, they have client states, they have a foothold in the UN, but they have no real allies. We do. So, in my view, our principal challenge now is to not give any truth to the argument Xi Jinping is making around the world that our political dysfunction makes us a declining and weak power, and that we cannot be counted on to fight for freedom around the world, to stand by our allies, and to continue on any project if it becomes hard or difficult or expensive. That's what Xi Jinping is telling world leaders all over. I've met with dozens of them, having just met with him, who repeat that, particularly in Africa. They're looking to see whether the United States is still the United States, which this Marine served, and which many of us still believe to be a great nation capable of inspiring another generation of people globally. But that is truly going to be tested in the next couple of weeks. If we can't deliver the resources for Israel to defend itself, for Ukraine to defend itself, we will no longer be a trusted and valuable ally. Last, humanitarian relief is a critical part, in my view, of our exercising power with humanity. The suffering of the Palestinians in Gaza, most of whom are not members of Hamas, in particular the children, is, I think, a painful counterbalance to the understandable, the righteous anger of the Israelis who suffered so brutally at the hands of Hamas. We have more people hungry and starving around the world right now than at any point in 50 years. Cindy McCain, who's a dear friend, is the head of the World Food Program. Lindsey Graham and I are trying to get several $1 billion more to meet this moment where there is hunger and instability in countries from Egypt to Somalia, from Pakistan to the heart of Africa. The war in Ukraine, which is the breadbasket for much of the Middle East and Africa, has impacted dozens and dozens of other countries. And Russia feeds them lies. Russia tells all of them on social media, if your food is more expensive, if your life is worse off, it's because of the Americans. I want us to have a robust answer to that. I want us to match our military might with some of our moral force and to meet the hunger of millions, to prove to them that we are that force for good I've always believed we are.
You feel good about the prospects in the Senate for funding for those important...
In the Senate, yes.
Okay, that's all I ask. That's your job.
We need your prayers.
Yeah. I do want to just kind of underscore what was talked about with the CHIPS and Science Act that Senator Young and that Jim kind of fashioned with Senator Schumer. That is an extremely important bill that was bipartisan, passed by Senator Young, because it, you know, the history of the United States has been a superiority in technological innovation that has fueled our economy, that has helped our defense. And we've really fallen behind. And it really is that Jim conversation that kind of help us move forward with that bill. But talk about, Senator Young, talk about other initiatives. I think you're kind of exploring AI and that massive development that we have to deal with in our lives, and sort of some legislation around that, or other things that you think there are good prospects for passage in the Senate.
Sure. Well, this was my work on this topic, and Chris will be deeply involved in this as well. He's been a leader among other issues on issues of intellectual property rights, and so that's certainly one of the many things we're trying to wrestle with when it comes to artificial intelligence. So first, let me define AI. And no, Jim Risch would tell you AI is artificial insemination. He hails from Idaho, and he owns cattle. And he's a rancher. Artificial intelligence is in the simplest terms, it's the ability to take a whole lot of data, and harness that data in a way by writing algorithms, run it through the algorithms, and then on the back end to be able to generate content that would be very difficult for individual human beings to develop without the aid of this tool. And that's what it is, a tool. You all use AI in your daily lives. If you have a cell phone, and everyone does, artificial intelligence technologies are built into that. It's almost a certainty, if you have ever applied for a mortgage, and many of you have, that as you applied for that mortgage, the company that took a look at your application ran some data through an algorithm to determine what sort of mortgage rates you should be eligible for and under what terms. But increasingly, this technology can produce content and make decisions, or assist us in making decisions that are really impressive and at times disturbing. You can all log on to ChatGPT. OpenAI is the producer of that technology. Many of you have probably already used it, but there are free versions out there. You can log into there and ask it all sorts of fun questions. Write a term paper on a particular topic, say, but do it in rap verse, right? It can produce that in short order. In my Senate office, we have a softball league. The other day, we're trying to figure out what we'll call next season's softball team, and so we put that in there, and within about 2 seconds, it generated the best nicknames you could ever come up with for a Senate softball team from the state of Indiana. I mean, so those are fun applications, but the future of warfare will be shaped by this technology. The future of medicine, we will have the ability to cure cancers, to treat all sorts of ailments in fairly short order and making rapid progress with this technology. Every child in the world will someday have the benefit of a personalized tutor through the application of this technology. We just need to manage some risks. Among the risks associated with this technology is the democratization of the ability to produce biological products, to make superbugs, potentially. That would be a negative use of this technology. How do you mitigate that? There are some ways. That's what Senator Schumer and I and a couple of my other colleagues are intently focused on. How do we make sure that when someone applies for a mortgage, there is not, through an unintended bias in the algorithm, some sort of discrimination against particular racial or ethnic groups? We're trying to mitigate that concern. So there are a host of concerns, most of which are already outlawed. And so our effort, Father John, is to make sure we apply our existing values embedded in our laws to an AI-enabled world. Perhaps we'll have to fill some gaps in our laws to make sure that people aren't being negatively biased in their applications for credit, for example. And then we need to embed within government the expertise on an ongoing basis to make sure that as new risks emerge or opportunities present themselves, these government officials can advise Congress, and we can keep changing our laws. And allowing the United States of America, who currently by far leads the world in developing AI technologies, we want to make sure the United States continues to lead. We don't want China, which has different values as it pertains to bias and workforce and all manner of other areas of life, to lead the world in developing this technology. We also want to make sure that our war fighters have access to the very best artificial intelligence technologies, because to win the wars in the future, we anticipate you will have to be able to keep secrets. That too will involve having the best AI to make sure others can't crack your codes. And have a better understanding of the battlefield and respond to new developments more quickly than your adversary. So it's a heady role that we're trying to play, especially if your partner carries a flip phone. I'm only saying this because I've said this to Chuck directly. But it's going to be collaborative, and in the end, if we make any errors, we anticipate those will be publicly aired and corrected, because we're going to use the regular order process that corrects for such errors in the end.
That's great. Let me, we have some students coming up, but let me just finally, it's easy to complain about politicians like yourself, but I want to kind of ask, what we can do. I mean, it's a cliche to point out we're a polarized country, and polls will tell you that those who identify as liberals tend to attribute malicious motives to conservatives, but not to liberals. Those conservatives attribute malicious motives to conservatives, but not liberals. And I was talking to, I had an interview like this with former.
You said conservatives twice.
Did I? Oh, did I? I meant to say liberals, bad motives to conservatives. Yeah, good. Sorry about that. But I was talking to the former Speaker of the House, Kevin McCarthy, in an interview like this. He said, I admire him for his candor. He said, look, everybody applauds bipartisanship, but the voters don't reward it. Talk about what you could do as politicians to bring us out of a kind of dysfunction or a kind of gridlock of a kind of polarized, and what we can do as voters to move us forward together as a country rather than just in this kind of headbanging situation. So I don't. That's a pretty broad balance. So tell me give me your thoughts. Yeah.
I'll take a crack at it. So you and I have discussed this, I think, offline before, too, Father John. And one of the things I always emphasize is, and I mentioned it earlier, I think I used the hyphenated word, self-restraint. It does take some self-restraint to, I think, be a legislator, and by that I mean someone who wants to make laws that we believe will improve the lives of our constituents. That, in the end, is such an important part of our job, but I think it's sacrificed for reasons of campaign donations or notoriety and what have you. It's often, and this is fueled sometimes by members of the media who are trying to give their customers what they think their customers want, and we celebrate the martial virtues. This sounds a little heady, a little like I'm citing the ancients here, but as someone who graduated from a service academy, the U.S. Naval Academy, martial virtues are important to me. It's important for people to have courage, physical courage. It's important for people to fight for what they really believe in, to defend their way of life and what have you. But let's not underemphasize the importance of dull virtues. Respecting your seniors, comity, civility, self-abnegation, self-restraint, delayed gratification. These too need to be celebrated. Working through institutions. It doesn't generate a lot of excitement. Dare I say, it doesn't generate a lot of media attention. My children would tell me it's boring. But if you have a society that venerates fighting and not cooperation, that's a real problem. So where can I deliver that message? I can deliver that message in small group settings, I find, across the state of Indiana. But we need larger platforms to drive this message, and we need people who support us in trying to cultivate this sort of atmosphere. And you're doing that. You're doing that by holding this forum, by giving us an opportunity to throw these ideas out for consideration, and I think that is really important. And then I think it's also important for us to make these things concrete, and this is the final piece of it. I am fortunate. I am lucky. There are a lot of quiet, workmanlike members of Congress who are incredibly conscientious. You don't know their names. You probably don't know their faces. And if this were a normal political atmosphere where we used regular order and where it felt functional and where conservatives didn't have an animus against liberals and vice versa that inhibited their ability to get important things done, they would have a lot more legislative accomplishments to call their own. and they could draw a straight line from their behavior and hard work to concrete accomplishments. It's very difficult to emphasize the importance of this sort of behavior from your elected officials if you don't have something to point to. Chris has America's answer to the Belt and Road Initiative, so he's fortunate. The CHIPS and Science Act, I was very fortunate, right? If I didn't work out every morning, I don't know if Schumer and I would have ever had that conversation, for example. They kicked that effort off. But I think to the extent you can say, all right, we're building a fab in Indiana. There are research dollars coming to University of Notre Dame. This startup or that startup would not have happened but for my efforts. I admit that this whole way of serving would perhaps have less appeal.
Yep.
So just a few quick pieces of advice. It is striking that in the last few years, we've actually had more and greater bipartisan legislative accomplishments than in the previous dozen years I've served in the Senate, yet it doesn't feel that way. Todd went through a whole list. I mean, literally the biggest infrastructure investment bill since Eisenhower, the most significant investment in community mental health and in gun safety since Clinton, the most dramatic investments in our national manufacturing strength since Reagan. I mean, these are big legislative accomplishments we both had a hand in, and yet it does feel like we're getting nothing done and we're totally divided.
Yeah.
That's because there's more attention paid to Marjorie Taylor Greene and Rashida Tlaib, or fill in the blank, AOC and MTG or whoever. They get more attention than the folks who roll up their sleeves and get to work, because more and more our news is considered entertainment. They're fishing for clicks and eyeballs rather than for substance and engagement. So we are literally preaching to the choir. You're taking an hour to come and listen to us on a game weekend. Thank you. A few quick pieces of advice.
You didn't give them free tickets, did you, Father?
Free ticket? If you find yourself describing the positions or values of someone else in your family, your workplace, or who's elected as crazy, think about what you're saying. Because someone who's crazy is someone you can't reason with. That's almost the definition. If I were to say a certain senator from Texas were crazy, I actually do more legislating with John Cornyn than almost anyone else. Narrowing it down. If I were to say that, I'm suggesting that Senator Cruz is beyond reasoning with, that there's no point in trying to sit down and work it out because, right? I mean, that's what the colloquial term means. And so now when I find myself or my team or my colleagues using that term, I say, that's not really what you mean. What you mean is he's coloring outside the lines. He's extreme, or he's unconventional, or he's contrary to regular order, which just doesn't sound as exciting as calling someone crazy. But we need to watch our language. My other piece of advice, put your darn phones down. These things are sucking into them so much of our ability to think and so much of our capacity to see each other as people. At home, when I'm asked what to do about division, I say, get involved. Go join the garden club or the neighborhood association or the PTA at your kid's school, or go do anything that makes you connect with real people and get off your darn phones. Because only by re-engaging with each other as people can we get out of the rabbit hole I think our national politics has been dragged into, in no small part by algorithms that are designed to feed on our most base instincts. Faith is about feeding our most positive and our most uplifting instincts, to encourage us to think about that which is good and true, perfect and appealing, that which makes us more godlike and less like the opposite. And if we describe each other through that lens that sees that of God in each other, and if we hold that in our attention, then we are more likely to make progress. And if instead we literally demonize each other, marginalize each other, and spend all of our time filled with outrage and pointing to each other's weaknesses and frailties, why, that way lies destruction and madness. We were in the Capitol on January 6th. I've had some bad days in 23 days of elected life, but that was one of the worst. We are built on a society that came through huge differences. We fought a civil war, and yet we've managed to make it most of the last decades without great disagreement and without widespread conflict. This feels more fragile to me now than it has at any time in my life. So let me just say how grateful I am to you, to Notre Dame, to all of you, and in particular to my friend, Senator Todd Young, for being willing to invest of your time and your heart and your spirit in the important work of weaving us back together. Thank you.
That was a tremendous, insightful and helpful conversation, but the best is ahead. The most important part of this conversation, we're going to have two students. I'm going to invite them up, and they're going to ask a question because they're the future, and they're what we most care about. So I'm going to ask that we welcome Joy Agu and Jacob Scherer to the stage. And Joy and Jacob, please introduce yourself and ask your questions for these senators. Joy.
Hi, thank you, Senator Coons and Senator Young, for being here today, and to Father Jenkins for facilitating this discussion and having this wonderful forum. So, hello, my name is Joy Agwu. I am a senior. I'm majoring in philosophy with a minor of constitutional studies, so I'm incredibly grateful to be here and talking with you today. My question is actually something that Senator Coons just touched on recently. Today, we are currently in the digital age, and social media platforms wield a substantial amount of influence over our daily lives. While they've played a role in worsening polarization, certainly, and spreading harmful misinformation, they've also served as catalysts for uniting people for vital social movements and as a channel for political transparency. So with that being said, what do you think can be done to mitigate the negative effects of social media without compromising its ability to foster democracy and engagement?
Thank you. Thank you so much for the question. Such an important question, and one that unfortunately neither Congress nor any particular administrations have done a good job of answering ever since the advent of social media. One of the things I've found since I've entered public life is I used to have this sense that it's consistent with what I learned in civics class as a child all the way up through graduate school, which was that you had competing branches of government, and each of them would be very jealous of their prerogatives and fight for more power. Instead, what I found in the United States Congress is that members of Congress don't like to make hard decisions because there can be nothing more damaging to your reelection efforts than to make a hard decision, because that's why it's hard. You'll alienate a number of people with whatever choice you might make. So we're very good at not choosing, not doing anything oftentimes. Learning about an issue for years and years and years, but never really working to improve the legal atmosphere so that we might actually help mitigate or even address to solve particular challenges. Then many of us will come home and will lament the imperial presidency, the unelected, unaccountable bureaucrats of the executive branch over whom we're supposed to have oversight powers. The irony of it. How does this relate to social media? Well, this is what we've done. Similar to artificial intelligence in the late 90s, as social media started to come on, That was when legislators began to be attentive to this. Do we need to somehow regulate this technology? It's doing some good. We've seen some ill effects, but we'll allow it to continue to evolve. We'll learn more about the technology. At some point, as mental health challenges highly correlated with social media increased, as our civic behavior took negative turns, correlated again with social media, we chose not to mitigate some of the risks or downside benefits so that all the good could be realized. We left it up to the courts. The courts used generations-old telecommunications law. They reinterpreted it and reapplied it, did the best they could to apply it to a social media world. So I think it's time for Congress to act on this front. It's time to hold social media platforms accountable for the products they produce and the services they offer in a more vigorous way. It's a time to bring more clarity, perhaps using this opportunity to work on artificial intelligence technologies, bring more clarity through the law on issues like privacy and intellectual property rights. And it's especially important that as we enter a critical election year, at a time when we're already divided, that we make sure that social media is not being harnessed in creative new ways, like the use of deep fakes, to influence our elections in ways that would make us all uncomfortable. So the bottom line is Congress really has a responsibility, I think, to not just speak on this issue, but to act. It won't be hard, but our job is not supposed to be easy. Thank you.
Thank you.
Joy, Senator Young's already talked broadly and knowledgeably about it. I'll just say I believe in science, and I believe in understanding the actual measurable impact of things on our communities, our families, and our country. Senator Cassidy and I have been working on the Platform Accountability and Transparency Act, PATA, a really catchy acronym, I know, which simply put, it's a bipartisan bill with a growing number of co-sponsors. I have a card. I have a card. That would allow us, using the National Science Foundation, to get under the hood and do genuine academic research into the impact of the algorithms that drive social media. As parents, we all have a gut instinct that the impact of Instagram and Meta and Facebook and Twitter, X, and other things on our children's sense of self and on their ability to have a realistic sense of body image and of engagement has been profoundly harmed, and that a growing national mental health crisis is in no small part driven by the intended consequences of these algorithms. But we don't have any proof of that. We have virtually no credible proof of what the algorithms do because we don't have access to them. So this legislation would allow companies to defend their trade secrets and to be guaranteed that the research that's being done is anonymized in ways that don't reveal things to their competitors, but would also, using the FTC, enforce agreements reached by some. There's only a few platforms of the size and significance that we really need to know what's going on under the hood. But to me, that's the first step, is for us to actually study it quickly and understand it and be able to measure it. In one other area I'll mention briefly, Senator Tillis and I are trying to advance a bill called Shop Safe. How many of you shop on, hypothetically, Amazon? Right? All of us. An astonishing number of counterfeits are now being sold daily. Folks are getting little packages that come from halfway around the world, shipped directly to your home, that include things, whether it's chew toys for your dogs or prescriptions, that are counterfeit and harmful. And there is no obligation on the platforms to enforce that. We created the fastest growing, most profitable, most innovative digital companies on earth by legislatively shielding them from liability. So Facebook has no liability for the social consequences of the content on their platform. Amazon has no liability for allowing counterfeits on their platform. That was a legislative choice on your behalf. And if you look at the Fortune 500, the top 10 companies, 20 or 30 years ago, none of them included these companies. Today, half of them are the household name companies like Google and Facebook. We have created enormous value and convenience, but we also need to begin to deliver transparency and accountability. That is legislatively hard to do, and there is a lot of lobbying pressure against it, a dramatic amount of lobbying pressure against it. So please, if you think that social media is something we need to better understand and better regulate, speak up. Talk to your senator.
Jacob.
So what will happen now is that Chris Coons will hand me one of these. It will tell me about his bill. He'll hand it to me. We will learn more about the legislation, and if past is any predictor of future success, I will likely co-sponsor Chris's legislation. But
And vice versa.
I didn't want you to think I was avoiding it. So young.senate.gov if you're looking for the press release or if you want to get in touch with my office.
Thank you both for being here today. My name is Jacob Shear, and I'm a senior studying political science, originally from Platteville, Wisconsin. So my question is about loneliness. So America is currently facing what the U.S. Surgeon General calls an epidemic of loneliness. More than half of all Americans say that no one knows them well, and the percentage of people who say they don't have close friends has increased fourfold since 1990. In The Origins of Totalitarianism, political theorist Hannah Arendt warns us that societies are more susceptible to authoritarianism when loneliness becomes an everyday experience. So my question is simple. Other than social media, which you talked about, who/what else is to blame for this current crisis, and what can policymakers be doing to alleviate this loneliness and strengthening our democracy?
Tough one.
No, I want to answer thoughtfully because I actually have given some consideration to this. I experience loneliness in my personal relations. I experience loneliness in my neighborhood, in my family. As I travel around the state, I hear about it. I heard our most recent Surgeon General talk about how loneliness is a public health epidemic, and I read things about this. I've been reading about it for years. Robert Putnam of Harvard University. Bowling Alone began, that was his first initiative. He wrote an article about how there had been a decline in civic participation over the years, which he characterized as a crisis. And he went out and he studied participation in bowling leagues and saw that over the decades it had declined markedly into the 1990s. And he has subsequently written voluminously about this. So what do? I think you start where Chris Coons suggested you start. Yes, put the phone away. Join. Try and get back in the habit of joining. It takes initiative. It takes intentionality. Not everyone is a Chris Coons extrovert, right? So right. But I think everyone can find a place and should try and find a place where they have one or two people that they look forward to seeing and who look forward to seeing them on a regular basis. We've tried to activate my sort of faith in just sort of showing up in my own family. My youngest daughter, the one who plays travel soccer now, she's in 8th grade. Her name's Anna. I'm incredibly biased, but she is the sweetest thing ever. And Anna, I have found, has a gift. people like Anna. People like to be around Anna because she's sweet. And we have a neighbor of mine, a few doors down. She is elderly. She lost her husband. She's by herself most of the time. And I very strongly suspect she's lonely. If she's human, which she is, we suspect. And so I said, Anna, you have a gift. You have an opportunity to serve. She looked at me like, well, this is another boring dad lesson. I said, Anna, why don't you go down there, do me a favor, knock on her door, say hi to her, and just try and strike up a conversation. And Anna's working on striking up the conversation. She's an 8th grade young lady. But, every couple of weeks, first through prompting, and now because it's just become a pattern of behavior for Anna, she knocks on the door, she shows up. I guarantee you that is the best interaction that my neighbor has over the course of that week, probably over the course of a month. I think we can encourage others to do that sort of thing. Robert Putnam actually advises going the other way. When it came time for recommendations in his most recent book called Our Kids, I would recommend it. He says, all the research shows that such a powerful policy lever is mentoring, whether it's big brothers, big sisters, or through a more informal mentoring program. Just about everyone here I know has benefited from some sort of mentorship relationship in their life. But with an aging population, we have a lot of very talented, very interesting, and public-spirited people who are sitting on the sidelines. If we could get them back into the game, make our seniors into mentors, I think that too would be a positive, create a positive dynamic for old and young alike. And maybe it would catalyze something broader. So that's my thought, is just the extent we can emphasize involvement and interaction. That is a very simple solution, but I think it's so important.
I'm just going to comment on a few random thoughts that have occurred to me. First is how we build our communities. I spent 10 years in local government, where I was a county executive, something I don't think Indiana has. But I was essentially the mayor of an area of 500,000 people where we had responsibility for land use planning for a community that was rapidly suburbanizing out into the cornfields from what is the urban core of Wilmington. And it was interesting to me to sit with people who had studied the social impacts of how we design our neighborhoods and our communities. There is fierce resistance to having more closely packed neighborhoods, to having interconnecting trails that allow one neighborhood to mix with another, for the investments that make it easier to walk to school or to walk to the store or to walk to a community center. We have ingested an orientation towards cars, towards throwing our kids in the back of a minivan and driving them everywhere. Second, safety. I don't know about folks my age, I just turned 60. When I was a kid, my mom shoot us out the door first thing Saturday morning and didn't want to see us until sundown. And literally would ring a bell when it was time to come home and didn't worry about what was going to happen to us. We were just roaming around the neighborhood playing kick the can and Relivio and all sorts of different games and exploring the woods and getting into trouble and, playing with neighborhood dogs and cats. Today, my kids' lives were so structured. We had dates for everything. They didn't just go wander around. And the lack of unstructured time to engage in play and activity with kids of different backgrounds and from different social levels is something we've lost by living in increasingly isolated and suburbanized homes and neighborhoods. So that means it takes intentional choice for each of us to reach out to and connect with folks. Remember Cheers? Anyone old enough to remember the TV show Cheers? That theme song that just started playing in your head? The punchline of it is, where everybody knows your name. One of the things I make a small effort to do in the Senate is to learn the names of the Capitol Police officer who stands at the door, of the guy who cuts our hair, of the woman who delivers our lunch and serves us at lunch every day. Because bluntly, when you know the names of the people around you who are in roles that are different from the role you're in, they get to know your name, you get to know them. There's one woman who literally just pushes the button for the elevator named Delta, because I've invested just a little bit of time in getting to know Delta and her family and her background, what brought her to the Senate. I have a little more joy every day when I walk by and say, "Hey, Delta, how you doing?" She goes, "Mr. Chris, doing just fine." And I ask about her sister, or I ask about her family. If we invest just another minute or two, and Todd gave a great example of what he's asking his youngest daughter to do, to just go down the street, ring the doorbell, and know your neighbor's name. My wife often points out that I don't know the names of all of our neighbors. I point out to her that that's because she identifies as neighbor, not the 10 people who live around us, but anyone who lives within a 10-block radius of us. My wife has that Irish Catholic gift. We'll walk past a couple going the other way. I'll stand and smile and nod, and then they'll walk by and she'll say, "You have no idea who that was, do you?" And I'll say, he's Tim, and that's, and she'll go, "Ann." And she'll say, "Their cousin Jeff was in the police academy when you were county executive. Her niece Stephanie was a nurse who helped care for you at St. Francis when you were sick 5 years ago. Their dog was bit by Riley 4 years ago in the park." How do you know all this? Because she pays attention. She learns people's names, holds them, and then learns them. So frankly, how do we deal with loneliness? A piece of it is not valuing things more than relationships, not building communities that make it hard to connect, respecting and loving people who give you the opportunity to be their friend, and asking of ourselves that we learn each other's names.
That's great. Thank you, Jacob. Thank you, Jacob. Joy, two things I'm going to close with. The first, let's not just listen, let's act. There will be a voter registration drive today from 3:30 to 5:30 in the Duncan Student Center. You'll be able to register whether you're from Indiana or anywhere else. So if you're not registered, go out and register. Second thing, these two men are hardworking, dedicated, effective public servants who have shared their time and their wisdom with us. We could not be more grateful. We wish them the best in their work, and thank you for your public service. Let's give them a round of applause. That was great. Couldn't have been better. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Brian. Thank you.